The title of the next presentation is Stick to the Sabbath Quo, the God-given grace of the Fourth Commandment. Please welcome Corinne Sandifer.
Have you ever stumbled across a wilted flower? Blistering sunlight scorches its petals, the once vibrant colors drained by heat. The roots, which once spread securely into the fertile soil, shrivel from their source of life. Flimsy and weak, what used to be beautiful and healthy becomes parched and desperate for nutrients. Do we not sometimes resemble this flower? In the burnout that chokes our culture, human beings sink into weariness, roaming from their fountain of prosperity. When burnout strikes, where do Christians seek their answer? For thousands of years, God's people have set aside the Sabbath day in obedience to Him. If we are supposed to obey the Sabbath, how do we do it? From the beginning, God knew the depths of human frailty. To set an example for humanity, He rested on the seventh day of creation. As 2,000 years flew by in the eyes of our sovereign God, He presented to His chosen people the 10 Commandments. The Fourth Commandment required the Israelites to observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy through the cessation of labor and practice of worship. This precious law took on a new meaning when Jesus walked the earth. He demonstrated the Sabbath to be a gift of God to man, washing away legalism, but solidifying the Sabbath's importance. It soon became a church pattern to embrace the Sabbath, resting from labor and gathering to worship. Today, however, we have lost sight of this commandment and fallen into a pattern of disobedience. Although many Christians believe the Sabbath is no longer applicable, Christians today are failing to obey the Sabbath to the detriment of their minds, bodies, and souls. The Sabbath cannot be abolished because it is a part of the 10 Commandments, which are permanent moral laws. Jesus Himself obeyed the 10 Commandments. They set God's standard of how we ought to live, reveal our sin and need for redemption, and set us apart. We can therefore conclude the Sabbath to be applicable and necessary. Because the Sabbath is a God-given command, it is our moral obligation to obey it. Not only this, but the Sabbath is healthy for the mind, body, and soul. Our minds need emotional separation from the chaos of the week, and our bodies need time to recuperate. Above all, our souls need deep nourishment from God Himself, which we cannot receive in its fullness without the Sabbath day. Now that we realize why we need a Sabbath, how do we observe it? God created the Sabbath as a day for us to celebrate our salvation. As a result, it is necessary that we dedicate time to worship Him corporately and individually. Just as the Israelites prepared special offerings for the Sabbath day, we must surrender a special offering of our time in worship of Him. In acknowledging His sacrifice and mercy, it is fitting that we celebrate through feasting, a practice that God's people have adopted since the beginning. While it is necessary that we worship Him corporately and individually, God also calls us to rest. Jesus reminded us in Mark 2:27 that the Sabbath was made for man. We must refrain from our weekly labor. This action of separation places the focus on our Heavenly Father and the things He created us to do, rather than the distractions and the obligations we confront every other day. Avoiding our typical toil grants physical and mental rest, while worship provides emotional and spiritual rest. After we have devoted time to these practices, there are other ways to rest and worship that are encouraged but not required, like individual worship or the cessation from labor. This is a time to be creative like our Creator, spend time in nature, and enjoy fellowship. Despite the misconception that excessive technology is fruitful rest, it does not heal us emotionally or mentally. We must nourish ourselves with joyful and renewing practices that the Sabbath was meant to involve, rather than indulge in those that do not honor God. Despite the importance of the Sabbath, there are many who would claim that the Sabbath is not sacred because we should rest and worship every day. Even if Christians in our nation do not blatantly state this, most live according to this claim that the Sabbath is not sacred. Yet this objection does not dismiss the fact that in Exodus 20:11, the Lord made the Sabbath a holy day. It must be set apart from other days. Sabbath renewal cannot occur in the same way during the remainder of the week, since we are steadily distracted by other obligations. If we do not institute a Sabbath, as Billy Graham stated, not only will we wear out physically, but we'll also neglect our relationship with God. God created the Sabbath for us to completely abide in Him and renew our relationship with Him. Christians, the law of the Lord revives the soul. In a Sabbath-obeying world, we are not blistered and bruised like wilted flowers. Delighting in the Fourth Commandment breathes life into our weary souls. King David, a man after God's own heart, was not wrong to say that in our wholehearted obedience, we become like trees, strongly rooted in pure streams. Its growth does not yield to the ways of the world because it is planted firmly in the joy of our Heavenly Father's commandments. We do not have to be scorched by the burnout that suffocates society. Look up to heaven and hear His warm whisper. The Sabbath day is a flood of grace. Thank you.